As you know, the Mrs. P skin quest and NPC reveal a lot about Mr. and Mrs. P. So much so that I think I've compiled all the parts of their lives together so we can see how exactly they got to where they are today. I mean, one of them's kind of infected, but you get the point. Disclaimer, this video is built on theories from secrets from the game. Don't take everything I say as fact, because most of this stuff is just theory. Alright, so Mr. and Mrs. P's life, so as we know of, starts at this school. Yes, that school. Mr. and Mrs. P were both presumably born in Lucella. There is a note right here. Now we learn from this that they met together in PE. Mr. P is a kid who doesn't really have that many friends. And Mrs. P always wanted to go to a circus but couldn't for some reason. Anyway, they become friends and are friends for a long time, and then Mr. P actually proposes to her in the forest right next to the school. And then some time passes by after this. Now what if I told you that the now billionaire Mr. P was once struggling to even get by? Both Mr. and Mrs. P move into a barn, and Mrs. P goes to medical school and becomes a doctor, and she also notably inspires Mr. P to start a carnival, as she always wanted to when she was a kid. So Mr. P does end up starting it, but initially struggles. Despite this, Mrs. P still believes in him like any good soul. She also tells him that her job as a doctor would keep them both stable. Suddenly, out of nowhere, randomly, the carnival becomes a success. A lot of people were going to it, and Mrs. P was thrilled and excited that she could finally experience a carnival. Because of the success, Mrs. P tries to resign the next day, but the co-workers beg her to stay because Lucella needs more doctors, and Mr. P feels bad for her. Now, because of their combined income, a while later, this is how Mr. P eventually becomes a millionaire. We know that they celebrate Christmas after he goes in the bar. He's then invited to send praise to a protection through mechanics and machines, who must had a lot of bad rumours spreading around them. After this, something presumably happens to the CEO, and Mr. P becomes the new owner, or at least he got a high role within the company. With the income from the carnival and the company, he then becomes a billionaire. Now, obviously we know that Mrs. P contracts an unknown deadly disease known as lineoma. Mr. P is so heartbroken that he spends 40% of his money just to research a cure. He also gathers a research group and uses the hospital and the power plant. It is around this time that Tio gets into Mr. P's head. He makes him have visions of Mrs. P and makes him very sad. He then tells Mr. P to give her Substance 128 now instead of later. The research team warned him against this, but because of Tio, Mr. P became impatient and takes his deal. He promises Mrs. P that after the test run, she would be home safely. Then obviously the Piggy family tests the cure, and then Mr. P just gives the substance to Mrs. P and then they return her home. Mrs. P has a chat with him while gardening and says that she feels great and all, and that she should probably give the Piggy family a call, which was the last time Mr. P ever saw his wife uninfected. Now, if you go to the Mrs. P skin, she was actually rotting, radioactive because of how close she was to the substance. He then pays a lot of money for people to find and see her again now. And now in that room is not Miss P. Now, Book 1 plays as normal with meeting the player. Now, with his knowledge from the PST M&M and also due to Tio, he built himself a cyborg version full of guilt and hate and starts to see things. Tio shrouds him with guilt for what he's done, and obviously the player then shows him the photo of Mrs. P and he snaps out of it. In the Book 1 end credits, his hat is not there, suggesting that he is still alive somewhere. Now let me know if you enjoyed this theory. I kind of combined all the notes that we saw and put it in chronological order. So let me know if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next video.
Subscribe to Safe Plays or he will bite you.